Hello everyone, and welcome to the 131st episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring our patron pick for June 2023, Joffrey Baratheon, from A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones. Though Joffrey comes from the same gargantuan tale as his grandfather, his story is relatively short in comparison, and so must this video be. Regardless, for the short time that Joffrey Baratheon lived, he became nothing short of a monster. A terror sitting upon a throne who was poised to shroud the land he ruled in an era of cruelty and misery, the likes of which his people had never seen before. In this video, we're going to cover the life of Joffrey Baratheon from beginning to end, using the information we're given in the books as well as the show, so we might discern just how one child can evolve into such a horrific creature. But before we begin, let's surf the web a bit with our sponsor for this video, Opera GX. Opera GX is the browser with an unparalleled amount of features and customizations, and while I think anyone should be using it, it really is a must-have for any of you gamers out there. If you're like me, I have 1,000 tabs open when I'm playing a game on my PC, and like a Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, you can trim the fat from your house by enhancing your performance using GX Control. With just a click of a button, you can limit the amount of CPU or RAM you want your browser to use, and give yourself that precious boost in performance we all crave. Now, performance is great, but one can't aspire to be royalty without royal style, and Opera GX's customizations are quite radiant. As you can see, I've chosen the medieval theme for my browser out of the enormous amount of options available to you in the GX store, and each mod comes with features like separate themes and colors, dedicated wallpapers, background music, keyboard sounds, and opening and closing tab sounds. And enabling or disabling your mods is as simple as heading over to the sidebar and clicking the mods button, which means you can always be ready for a style change for any occasion. Now, all of this is great, but I'm sure many of you, like me, are wary of switching browsers because of how much of a hassle it is. Well, Opera GX takes care of that as well with their import tool, and all your browsing history, bookmarks, cookies, and even your Chrome extensions can be transferred over without any fuss. However, in my humble opinion, the greatest feature Opera GX has is the new videos feature, a section of the GX corner that allows you to see the latest 12 videos from my channel. And you can have this easy access to the latest and greatest from yours truly and everything else Opera GX has to offer by clicking the link down below and downloading Opera GX completely free. That's just a few clicks to start enhancing your browsing experience today. Thank you, Opera GX, for sponsoring this video. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Joffrey Baratheon was born the illegitimate son of Cersei and Jaime Lannister in the year 286 AC at King's Landing. As an infant and toddler, Joffrey was seen as a beautiful child befitting his pure Lannister heritage, but the beauty of his exterior wasn't enough to defend him against the circumstances of his upbringing. As a Lannister, supposed Baratheon, and heir apparent to the Iron Throne, Joffrey was afforded all the luxuries and comforts of a child of his station, and that alone may have been well enough to spoil him rotten. However, it's not so much his status as royalty as it is the parents who raised him that decided the course of Joffrey Baratheon's life. Though Jaime is Joffrey's biological father, that doesn't matter too much considering they never had a father-son relationship. And so with Robert being the only father he ever knew, it's Robert's influence on Joffrey that we need to concern ourselves with. Robert Baratheon, by all accounts, should have never been more than a soldier, or at the very least, the head of a noble house, as his chief desires in life lay in battle and in the bedroom, never much caring for the particulars of ruling, nor the demands of fatherhood. Robert was always much too concerned with his own pleasure above anything else, even when it came to his own children. And we're told as much when Cersei says that Robert was out on a hunt when she was laboring to bring Joffrey into the world. Absent would be the best word to use to describe Robert's role in the raising of his children. And though it's always Robert's choice to treat his children this way, it would seem that Joffrey gave Robert more reason to ignore him because of how he reacted to Robert when he was around him. According to Cersei, and I quote, "Joff would cry whenever Robert picked him up. His grace did not like that. His bastards had always gurgled at him happily and sucked his finger when he put it in their little base-born mouths. Robert wanted smiles and cheers, always, so he went where he found them, to his friends and his whores. Robert wanted to be loved." So, with more reason to cast his son aside, Robert continued his existence much as he had prior to his son's birth, and while Joffrey sat on the sidelines watching his father drink, hunt, and feast, he began to develop feelings of neglect, sadness, and inferiority. Now every child wants to feel the love and admiration of their parents, and Joffrey is no different. Perhaps in Joffrey's case, his desire to receive recognition from his father was far greater than most of us feel, as not only was Robert his father, but he was the king, the man who smashed the dragon and took the throne, and Joffrey is the heir to that mighty lineage. So I imagine that Joffrey was eager to prove himself to his father not only as his son, but as a man worthy of being king. Something that might be a gruesome indicator of this is the story Stannis told of Joffrey's murder of a pregnant cat when he was younger. Joffrey, I remember once, this kitchen cat, the cooks were wont to feed her scraps and fish heads. One told the boy that she had kittens in her belly, thinking he might want one. Joffrey opened up the poor thing with a dagger to see if it were true. When he found the kittens, he brought them to show to his father. Robert hit the boy so hard I thought he'd killed him. Now, as many of you well know, killing small animals is a classic sign that a person has developed or is developing antisocial personality disorder. However, because Joffrey chose to present an unborn kitten to his father, I think there's a reason why, beyond morbid curiosity, that Joffrey took this action. You see, Joffrey was well aware at this tender age that one of his father's primary interests was hunting, and in his efforts to gain any sort of affection or recognition from his father, Joffrey decided to conduct a little hunt of his own, bringing home a kitten to mount, just as Robert brings a stag. With that in mind, it's easy to see how Robert's treatment of his son contributed to his development of ASPD, as receiving abuse or neglect from one's parents is a contributing factor to the development of this disorder. By the time the story of A Song of Ice and Fire begins, Robert is ashamed of his son, and during a conversation with Ned, he wonders how he could have made a son like that, and though he's too blind to see it, it's quite apparent that Robert had a heavy hand in making Joffrey into the disappointment he sees him as if Robert had not been put off by his son's reaction to him when he was an infant, and actually played a fatherly role in his life. In all likelihood, Joffrey may have never developed the cruel or sadistic tendencies that he's increasingly known for as he grows older, and you have to wonder if the cruelness that Joffrey displayed when he was a child was but a reflection of all the negative feelings he developed as a result of his father's neglect. However, to say that it was only Robert's fault that Joffrey developed into a sadistic monster would be an error, as the woman who truly raised him, Cersei Lannister, is an exceptionally cruel and sadistic woman herself. Cersei is well versed in the art of Westerosi politics, and taking a page from her father's book, she's more than willing to have people tortured or killed whenever necessary. And being the queen of the realm and the daughter of the true power in Westeros, her ego is massive and unlimited. When you put a child destined to be a king in her arms, you find that she'll go to great lengths to ensure that her son is given the same dread education she was given in the matters of nobility. And when you factor in his exposure to all her snide remarks, holier-than-thou attitude, and frigid demeanor, you get a boy who reflects his mother's horrid personality, a boy who has also developed an inferiority complex due to the treatment he received from his father. What makes all of this even worse is that Cersei coddled Joffrey, her precious king-to-be who could do no wrong and deserved the world. So not only does Joffrey get what he wants, but Joffrey can do as he pleases with virtually no repercussions. And all that we've discussed so far amounts to the boy we first see accompanying his family to Winterfell at the beginning of this story. Perhaps the one truly positive aspect of Joffrey is that he's inherited the Lannisters' beauty, and in the book he's described as tall, handsome, and strong for his age, though his smile is often sinister, and the way he conducts himself is snide and cruel. In the show, Joffrey is handsome enough for his age, but he's nowhere near tall nor strong, and here he has a much more weasel-like quality to him, the skeevy and conniving little princeling who's about as honorable as a starving rat. While the image Joffrey projects is important in establishing our disdain for him, it's more so his personality and his actions that really drive home how vile of a person he is. Now, considering there is so little good to say about Joffrey's personality, or Joffrey in general, I figured we should talk about the positives in his character first. What's halfway positive about Joffrey is that when he wants to, he can be a gentleman. In the show, we see a bit of this prior to the fiasco with Micah and Arya, and later on when he apologizes to Sansa. But in the books, he shows much more kindness and amiability when he's spending the day with Sansa. They ride horses, explore caves, have a quaint lunch at a holdfast, and Joffrey even sings to Sansa as they're walking through the woods. All the charm and gallantry of a prince that you might expect from someone like Joffrey. He continues to show this streak of cordiality even after the incident at the inn, sitting next to Sansa at the tourney of the hand, and treating her with the same courtesy and respect that he had shown prior. Later on, when he's crowned king, he even shows some mercy when Sansa begs for Joffrey to spare her father's life, stating that because of his love for her, that he certainly will. Some of the false courtesy and respect he showed Sansa is also extended to Marjorie, but that's it. These instances are the only time when we see Joffrey acting in any sort of positive way, and the thing about all these things is that none of them really mean anything in the grand scheme of things. Joffrey was only acting as a love-struck suitor towards Sansa because he had to, or because he knew it would benefit him, and he does much the same to Marjorie. And as we'll discuss shortly, he doesn't keep his promise to spare Ned Stark's life. So, with that smidge of false positivity out of the way, we can now discuss what Joffrey is really made of. When we see Joffrey speak for the first time in the books, we're shown that he is confrontational, petulant, and condescending, warring with the Stark boys upon first contact, and leveling insults at them left and right as he boasts of his superiority, challenging them to fight him with open steel so he might show them what royalty is made of. His callous and uncaring nature is then put on full display when he brushes off Tyrion's suggestion that he comforts Lady Stark in the wake of her son's injury, accurately surmising that his courtesies regarding the matter would do the Starks no good, but he cannot grasp how displaying his kindness to them is the proper thing to do. As to Joffrey, who can't stand the wailing of women, if doing something doesn't benefit him in some way, what's the point of doing it at all? His ego and narcissism know no bounds, and Joffrey is fond of proclaiming himself to be a great warrior in waiting. A man who's going to sweep the battlefields and the lists once he comes into his own, foolishly believing that his untrained self, by virtue of his blood and station alone, will conquer all before him as one favored by the gods. Selfishness is the core principle which Joffrey abides by, and he's a burgeoning hedonist who takes his pleasures where he can, even if that pleasure is to be found in the injury of others. Sadism and cruelty are the two key traits driving all that Joffrey does, and they can be found within every dreaded action Joffrey takes throughout this series. In our first encounter with his sadism, we find Joffrey tormenting an innocent boy, Micah, for his own pleasure, and to presumably show off to Sansa, challenging him to a duel, and commanding him to obey his prince as he cuts his cheek. Upon ascending to the Iron Throne, Joffrey reneges on his vow to spare Eddard Stark, and orders Sir Ilan Payne to cut off his head, an act which brings him the joy of displaying his power, watching another man die, and of torturing Sansa. Speaking of Sansa, Joffrey routinely punishes her for the wounds he suffered from her family, torturing her emotionally by forcing her to look upon her slain father's rotting head, and using his Kingsguard to beat her whenever he feels the need to release any anger he feels towards her, the continued war, or anything else that might be bothering him at the moment. And once that opportunity is taken from him upon her marriage to his uncle, he instead finds ways to mock and ridicule the both of them to get his rocks off. His uncle earned a special place in Joffrey's heart after he struck him, and for the duration of his life afterwards, Joffrey makes every attempt to beat his uncle into submission by flexing his kingly muscles. Sir Dantos Hollard earns a role as the young king's plaything as well, and the knight-turned-fool suffered many a punishment for the amusement of his king. When a riot breaks out in King's Landing, Joffrey's first reaction is to order all who were present killed, and though he was never given much of an opportunity, we can assume that his torture of the small folk would have become an increasingly common occurrence during his reign. When Tyrion tries to solve some of Joffrey's misgivings by presenting him with two ladies of the evening to have his way with, he chooses to have one viciously beat the other while he watches. And when he's given Raz the next time around, he brutally murders her by tying her to the bed frame and firing crossbow bolts into her. The thing about Joffrey and his cruelty, though, is that if he were more subtle about it, like say, Roose Bolton, he might have enjoyed a long and happy reign as king. But unfortunately for Joffrey, he is monumentally stupid. Joffrey acts purely off his ego and desires, and he thinks little beyond what doing something will do for him in the moment. There are times when Joffrey shows some concern for his kingdom and the way it's ran, like when he discusses creating a royal standing army, or concerns himself with Daenerys and the threat she poses. But at all other times, he acts as the cruel and idiotic fool that he is. A boy who would rather display his superiority and enact his sick fantasies upon anyone he pleases than rule a kingdom effectively. If it weren't for the help of his grandfather and his uncle, Joffrey's reign would have been even shorter than it already was. If Joffrey had his way, it would be swinging swords and dungeons filled to the brim. Heads would roll, tournaments, duels, and hunts would become a daily occurrence, and war would be declared on any house that dared to insult even a hair on his head. He has no mind for strategy or long-term planning, and he only thinks so far as he needs to exact his pleasures from people in any way he pleases. What makes him all the more pathetic, though, is that he is without a doubt a sniveling coward, and whenever something doesn't go his way, he's more likely to call for his mommy than he is to stand up and face whatever trouble he's got himself into. The thing is, though, it's fine for Joffrey to be a bit of a coward, because when it comes down to it, he's still a child. Yes, he's a cruel, spiteful, and sadistic child, but no matter how much he boasts and brags, he is still a child. It's perfectly fine that Joffrey isn't some genius strategist or masterful swordsman, as few people his age are. You master these things as you gain experience. But the problem is that Joffrey is such an egotistical and stubborn child that he'll never really become any of those things. He's always going to think he's better than everyone around him, and the small amount of advice he does take isn't going to help him grow into the man that he believes himself to be. In all likelihood, if Joffrey had lived past 14, he would have become a much worse king than Aerys Targaryen, as Tyrion claims, and that's because he would have never grown past the faults in his personality that he developed as a result of his upbringing. As much as murdering a child isn't something that should be condoned, fortunately for the world of Ice and Fire, Joffrey is assassinated before he can cause the monumental damage to the realm that he would have. And the reign of Joffrey Baratheon only serves as a small but exceptionally cruel footnote in the history of Westeros. And at his rather gruesome end, who was Joffrey Baratheon? With all that we've discussed so far in mind, it's easy to paint Joffrey as your classic psychopath, and he has all the hallmarks of a thoroughly cruel and sadistic person. And unfortunately for Westeros, it just so happens that he became something much worse, a king. With delusions of grandeur and a massive ego to match, Joffrey became a barbaric representation of all that's wrong with his house and the people who raised him. A boy fated to be king, whose desire to prove himself and the influence of his terrible mother warped him into a noble monster, a boy without empathy given no limits, and a toy box of innocence to torture as he pleased. Joffrey is a sickening example of what a poor upbringing and absolute power can bring, and all that Joffrey was caused immense suffering to those around him, and had he lived long enough, the world might have burned beneath his fingertips. And though he never wanted to be, Joffrey was without a doubt a boy whose entire person was nothing short of pure evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Joffrey? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you liked this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, to my patrons, and anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.